Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this Monday morning virtual professional development opportunity. My name is Joe Schmidt. I'm the Social Studies Specialist for the Maine Department of Education. Today, I'm very excited to introduce Chuck Taft from the U School in Milwaukee, correct, Chuck?
Yep.
Yes, okay, that's what I thought.
No Rocky.
Chuck is a colleague and friend of mine from back in Wisconsin. We served on the Wisconsin Council for the Social Studies Board together. We've done a handful of presentations together, sometimes on purpose, sometimes on accident. Chuck is an award-winning middle school U.S. history teacher. He has been named previously Wisconsin's State History Teacher of the Year. And I believe you made one of the top 10 finals for the national award as well. Is that, yep. And I will say that my experience in watching Chuck and seeing what he does in his classroom, those awards probably still don't even do him justice. So again, please welcome, and I'd love to introduce Maine. Chuck, this is Maine. Maine, please welcome Chuck Taft, a middle school U.S. history teacher from the U School in Milwaukee.
Thank you very much, Joe. I really appreciate that. And good morning, everybody in Maine. It is, I'm in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. It is not balmy and sunny. We might hit 45 today, which would be nice. So, but I'm here to talk to you about a little bit about this cartoon that I've got presented right here with my good friend Calvin, who I grew up with, and also about something else that I love, which is game shows. So, how many of you are familiar with the match game? All right, match game. You know the match game. Match game was Gene Rayburn right here, this guy right here, old time. I'm kind of dating myself a little bit. And now it's hosted by Alec Baldwin. But the concept of the match game is you've got six sort of celebrities that are on a panel, and somebody asks, the host will say, hey, fill in the rest of this statement. And, you know, sometimes the matches get a little bit body or a little bit PG-13 or whatever, but I've done this presentation before where I started with the match game, and I want to be the host right here, and I want you to be one of the contestants. And so the statement that I would make on this match game right here is I was at a social event. Of course, it would be social distancing now, but I was at a social event, and somebody asked me what I did, and I said I'm a social studies teacher. And that person said, oh, I remember my social studies classes. My social studies classes were so blank. I'm going to give you 15 seconds to type in the chat room, type in your blank. Take another 5 seconds. Because typically when I've done this, I don't get the answers that Josie gave, or that Mark gave, or that Sarah gave. All right. Or that Jody gave. Corinna, I've never had marginal as an answer, but I think you kind of know where I'm going. But you know what? I think Melanie, Tammy, Eileen, Susan, Sharon, Roberta, John, Carrie, you're going to get the answer that I was kind of heading for, and that is boring. And I personally feel that part of that boring is because a lot of people think, like Calvin did in that cartoon, that they're irrelevant. That a lot of the social studies classes that we had growing up dealt with a lot of irrelevance, and a lot of kids struggle with that right now. So my goal today is to help you have some ideas about maybe making your class or your curriculum a little more relevant. And there is a bit.ly down there, and I'm going to see if I can type it in without making too many mistakes. There's a bit.ly there that kind of gives an overview of some of the ideas that I'm going to throw out here today. So if you want to open that up, it should just make a copy. And if you can either give me a thumbs up or oh yeah, I got it, Chuck. Hopefully that'll make a copy of a document for you. Did that work out?
Chuck, mine said that I needed to have it shared with me.
Do we need sharing? Okay, give me just a second, because I thought I took care of that, but not always.
While we're at this, while I'm up on the screen, everybody, I will go ahead and set it so that you guys can unmute yourself as well.
Thought I had that for everyone. Try that now. Make sure I got my other one too. Does that work out now?
Yep, it asked me to make a copy.
Perfect. Okay. So that'll be just a kind of a little bit of an overview about this. What I've got a big 4-word poster or banner that's hanging in my classroom, below my room, my room timeline. And it's, why does it matter? This is something that I point to pretty much every day. Kids finish my sentences with this, usually by the middle of September. It's a focal point because I'm trying to get my students to realize the value and the importance of studying social studies. A lot of them don't really, in past classes, they might not think that any of this is really, really important. And I'm preaching to the choir here. I'm going to mention that in just a second, but we know that social studies are marginalized. I know that people like Joe are fighting the good fight to make sure that they're not, especially at the elementary level. And when it comes to the amount of time spent, and when it comes to the involvement of reading and the involvement of sometimes of even expenses with schools, that social studies are marginalized. And I think we need to fight that fight to make sure that people know, especially students and families know, that social studies matter. So I realize that right now, especially with you guys here at my time, 8:11 on a Monday morning, 9:11 on your time, that I'm preaching to the choir. I get that. And I appreciate that. And I appreciate you being here. I appreciate Joe putting together an amazing, just a laundry list of awesomeness for these professional development possibilities that you're going to have in the next month or 2 or 3. So thank you for doing that and joining me to start off this whole process. But also my goal is to light a fire, because I really feel personally that there are some things that we can do as social studies teachers to make our discipline, our content, our skills, our curriculum, whatever you want to say, much more relevant to our students, most importantly, to our parents, our families, our constituents, and to our schools. Couple caveats as I go through all this that I always like to say. I teach at a small independent school. Not really small. It's a, I have 78 students in my 8th grade class. Are there any 8th grade teachers out there that have, and I can't see everybody, but I know that some people would say, oops, 78 teachers, wow, or 78 students, that's not a lot. And in reality, it isn't. My average class size is somewhere around 17, 18. Also, I teach in an independent school so that I'm not beholden to district standards or state standards, or, my curriculum is pretty much me. I'm the only 8th grade history teacher. And the rest of my department, I'm the department chair, they're the only ones. So we have a lot of independence. So I know you have some constraints. I get that. But part of my lighting the fire is to try to get you to break those constraints. And to maybe fight back, push back a little. Because what the last thing that I'm going to say that we need to do is to make sure that kids can memorize dates and really test kids on memorizing dates. That might be a constraint, or you might be constrained by a textbook. You might be constrained by some sort of assessments. I think we can push against those. Okay. Now, again, this is all about, my goal here is to talk about relevance, about being relevant. And I want you to think about what we want to do in our classrooms. Think about it just for a couple seconds here. We don't want to get our kids to be really successful on Jeopardy. I don't think that's our driving force, right? We don't want kids to be able to, crush a test and then go on, and that's where I think relevance comes in, because I'm a big fan of word origins, which I think is another way to get kids to be interested in stuff. But when it comes to word origins and the definition of relevance, it means closely connected or appropriate to what is being done or considered. And also relation to the matter at hand, practical, and especially social applicability. So if we look at the adjective and the noun there, this is really, I think, what we want to do, right? We want to, we want to make our content practical and our curriculum practical with social applicability, which is a really big word, But I love word origins. If you look at the origin of relevance, it comes from this Latin word, which means to raise up. And I love that concept because we're trying to raise up our students. We're trying to raise them up to be better people, better citizens, better learners, better thinkers. And that's where that word relevance comes in. And I also want to make sure that in my world, in my words, the word relevance does not equal engagement. I can be relevant. I can have some relevant teaching and or some relevant curriculum, and a student might not be engaged. I get that. And also, I can engage my students, but it might not be relevant. All right, I can engage them with some really fun games, or a really good story from my past, or showing them, showing them clips from a popular movie or whatever. But it might not be that relevance, that social applicability, and raising them up. But I do firmly believe that relevance can lead to engagement. And engagement to me is sort of, that's the battle that a lot of us face when trying to, we got to sell the social studies, and we got to sell it to our students. We got to sell it to our families. We got to sell it to our schools, our constituents, to our government. And I think that's where relevance can fit in. Okay. So what I'd like to do is I have this blueprint for your class that I made. There's a link to that blueprint. Should be a link to that blueprint on the top of your on the top of that handout that I gave you. And also, I want to make sure that I want to get to my chat here. There we go. And if you could click on that, there's also a bit.ly there. It's Matter Me. And hopefully that works for everybody. And if one person could just say to me, hey, Chuck, it works, then I'll feel better. My heart won't palpitate as much. But that is a blueprint that I want this presentation to be relevant to you. Okay. I want this to be something that you can take something away, as you'll see when I go through here. Perfect. Thank you, Nicole. And thanks, Crystal. Because I want you to consider your life right here. All right. This isn't about my 8th grade history extravaganza. This is about what you're teaching and who you're teaching. And so I want you to consider anything right now about the content you teach. All right, what is your content area? The skills that you're trying to get your students to develop, which all of us have specific skills that we want to support, but some of us may be a little different here and there. Excuse me. How you monitor their learning, like in assessment, consider that too. And then production, what you'd have students do, which links to assessment. But what do you have students do to demonstrate their learning? So consider all of those things, because what I do in my classroom is much different than anybody else in any other classroom, because they're all different, right? But I wanted to, again, make sure this is somewhat, I guess, personalized for you. So if you can consider that for a second, even if you think of, and I'm not sure, real quick, are you guys all doing virtual learning right now in Maine, or is everybody kind of, so you're zooming, you're zooming with me, you're zooming with students and all that? Maybe even think of, I've got 4 more weeks of school, and I know that I'm going to be teaching the civil rights movement. So that could be my content. What skill could I develop? Could I have my students assess a little differently just in the next 4 weeks? Or move this forward to next fall, when hopefully we go back to schools to see our students. But again, I want to make this personalized as much as possible. Okay. Also, my hope out of any presentation I ever give or get is that you get at least one pearl, one little shining thing that you can, this maybe little thing that you can, keep and make your content, your curriculum, your skills, and the assessment you develop better for your kids, because that's why we're here. It's about the children. So let's get going here. Now, one area that I think we can increase relevance is skills. Most people think that they go into their history classrooms, their social studies classrooms, their economics, whatever, and they think that, I'm here to study, to take a test, so I got to memorize some dates, maybe some economic formulas. I need to know the 3 branches of government, and I need to know the capital of Djibouti, which is Djibouti. Very interesting, right? But Um, I think that if we share the fact that it's not about that with students, it's about developing skills that will help them in their life, that will help make it relevant. Now, these skills that we're talking about are the skills that we want them to have in order to be historians and political scientists, and geographers and economists. You know, I call my students young historians. I don't call them students, really. I say my young historians, even when I address them, historians. All right. I want them to be historians. I want them to think like historians. And historians don't memorize dates. They don't have to. And our kids don't have to memorize dates either because they got it on their phone. You know, after they do a TikTok, they can do a little TikTok, you know, this kind of stuff. And then they can go, oh, yeah, and when was Fort Sumter? Oh, yeah, look, there it is, in April 1861. Okay? So we want to say that, guys, we want you to develop your skills. And I share the skills that I want them to develop. I teach American history. So one thing I do is I use thinking like a historian. And I use these 5 areas of thinking like a historian. Joe's very familiar with thinking like a historian. Everything I do in class, I'll have students point to these on my wall. And sometimes these are these a lot of times are their assessment targets, cause and effect, change in continuity, turning points through their eyes, and of course, using the past, which I'll get to in just a second. But those are the skills. But the key is, in my mind, is I share those skills with my students. They're posted in my room. I want my students to know why they are doing this and why it's not just about dates. This is the more important aspects of our curriculum. In geography, there are geographic skills index from the National Geographic, and I don't know how many geography teachers are out there, but it's about asking questions and acquiring geographic information. It's not about, can you fill in a blank map on a test? It's more about being a geographer. It's about, when it comes to civics, it's the civic, it's about civic engagement. I share with them my state standards. And I tell students that, listen, kids, these are the state standards from the state of Wisconsin. Here are my standards for history right here. Nowhere in there does it say anything about knowing a date. For geography, nowhere in there does it say anything about knowing all 50 state capitals. Now, I will say that, should you know all 50 state capitals? Well, cultural literacy is good, but it's more important what happens in those capitals and why was maybe a capital chosen. Same thing with economics and political science. So I'm asking you guys to share the guiding principles from the state of Maine with your students. Maybe even the first day. Guys, this is what I want you to do, and have them check in throughout the entire year, and that can increase the relevance. That's why they can know, well, what am I really trying to do here? Am I trying to, understand why am I trying to understand the cultures of Latin American countries, maybe in a global education class or whatever? Well, because that could help me. Maybe I could be an integrative and informed thinker. I can be, creative and a practical problem solver for those. I can learn from those areas. I think if you share those, that will help with the relevance. Also, I'm not sure how big is the C3 in Maine right now. On a scale of 1 to 10, is the C3 like, oh yeah, this is kind of our guiding force, or oh yeah, Joe's talked about that once or twice, or oh yeah, C3, that's something that I think I got in the mail once. Just real quick, shoot in. Again, so we're talking local too, right? So for someone like Charles, for the C3 is being new to you, this is where I think that social studies needs to go. And I didn't come up with the C3. Some people incredibly brilliant did. But this is what I try to get my students to understand too, is this is what we want you to, this is why social studies is relevant. This is why it matters. It's going to help you in college. It's going to help you in your career, and it's going to help you as a citizen, college, career, and civic life. And it's about developing questions, then getting disciplinary tools, which is a lot of what we would say are historical, economic, geographic, or civic literacy, evaluating sources, which I don't know if you guys have heard about this, but there's a lot of information on the internet that's not true. And we need our kids to be able to evaluate those sources. And then possibly the most important one, taking action. So my point being is, my first thing I wanted to tell you is, how can we make our classes and our curriculum relevant? We have to share with our students why we are doing this. And that's the skills and the standards that a whole lot of social studies teachers have come together to develop. And I can say that, guys, this isn't Taft talking. All right. This is the social studies world. So let's go. And we start with this right away. And kind of as Charles said at the very, very start, it's not about dates. Now, I like the dates too, because I love Jeopardy, and I love, I don't know if HQ is even going on anymore on the cell phone, but I love those things. I love playing my trivia games, but that's not why we're in it. Okay. So that was my first thought about how to make this relevant. And this can go from even like 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade all the way to professionals. When I did my methods classes, this is what I would start with too: why we teach social studies. And I think our kids need to know that. It makes our classes relevant. One way you can do it too is to make active learning here. Not just kind of like games or whatever, but if you want, I want my students to be young historians. So we do National History Day. I'm a convert. It's an amazing program. It's as close as they can get to being young historians. If we want our students to really understand the stock market game and be economists, they can play the stock market game. The civic mirror on the bottom left puts them into citizenship. If we want to really talk about kids learning about global education, they can do the Model UN. Those are all ways that they can develop those skills. And the great thing is, none of those really have like a specific content base. It's using the content to develop those skills. And I think that's maybe the message that we can tell our kids. Okay. Second thing, the second way to make things relevant is, I'm a big fan of big questions and big ideas. And part of this develops from the C3 framework, where it's about analysis and inquiry. Everybody in there is inquiry a big part of social studies in Maine, or even in social studies preparation. I know in Wisconsin, in many undergrad classes, that it's the inquiry lesson that we're trying to do, that inquiry arc. So that idea about inquiry, about asking questions, is huge. And that's why I focus on that question right there. Why does it matter in my classroom? But you'll also notice that on the bottom below that, I've got 10 questions. And this really is the driving force for my class, for my 8th grade history class. And I tell students that when you walk out of my door in June, this is what I want you to be able to discuss when it comes to my content. All right. It's not what I want you necessarily to be able to do. That's what I've already shared. But these are the questions that I want you to be able to discuss. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with the concept of essential questions, but one of the great ideas that I've ever heard about essential questions is, what essential questions should be like Velcro. And that's why I have them hanging in my room. And everything we talk about in class should stick to one of those questions. And if it doesn't, then we're either off topic, which sometimes is okay because it might be fun or whatever in a break, but it's either off topic, or I need to realize that it's something that we don't need to talk about. So if you can focus on questions, and that brings up the relevance for students as well. And also, I like the concept of big ideas. So a big idea or big questions, like these big guiding questions, that helps students compartmentalize. It helps them categorize. It helps them get the big picture. And when it comes to a big idea, here's one big idea that I have that goes through our entire classroom. And you could have this big idea in any content, a big idea, not specifically this one, but in any content. It sort of serves like an anchor. And kids, I think, need anchor. Kids need anchors, especially when they're young. But there's this concept of words to the wiser from Kylene Beers and Robert Probst. They're two reading experts, and I'm not sure if everybody's ever heard of them. They're pretty awesome. But in this words of the wiser, when I teach the Declaration of Independence at the very, very start of the year, we read the Declaration of Independence, which is of course to kids, it's a whole bunch of gobbledygook. They had learned about the American Revolution the year before. But when I talk about the Declaration of Independence, I show this video. I don't know if anybody's ever seen this from I don't know if anybody's ever seen this video. And can you hear the video real quick? If I press play.
There's no audio, Chuck.
Okay, no audio, and it's probably because I'm using it has something to do with headphones, and also I don't know if I shared my video or whatever. But anyways, this is a cool video where they had a bunch of actors reading the Declaration of Independence. And Morgan Freeman, who I always introduce as, he's God, the voice of God. And Nicole has probably seen it too. That's awesome, Nicole, because I use this when I do the Declaration. He says, what is the meaning of the Declaration of Independence to me? In other words, what's the big idea? What are the words of the wiser of the Declaration of Independence? And he says, the true glory of the Declaration of Independence is our nation's epic struggle to close the gap between the ideals of this document and the painful realities of our society. Okay? And I use that phrase for the rest of the year. That is my anchor when we talk about the Gettysburg Address, when we go to Susan B. Anthony, when we talk about Martin Luther King Jr., because they all go back to the Declaration of Independence. It's on my wall under another big poster or another big banner that says big ideas and life lessons. And we keep going back to that, and that adds relevance. My kids can mimic me as well. They can constantly say, this was another example, young historians, of when America was trying to, and they'll all go, close the gap, Taft. But at least they realize that we have there's this relevance to what we're talking about. There's this end goal of America's story. And so if there's a big idea or a life lesson that you can get them to answer, in economics, it could be all about choice. If you have a big poster that says choice, because economics is about choices, right? If it's about geography, it could be how is the world uniquely similar and drastically different, or some sort of big idea, and you keep going back to that. It'll be great for a while, and then they'll go, oh my God, he's saying close the gap. But then by the end, they're using close the gap in essays in their English class. When they're talking about different types of, when they're looking at different aspects of literature and things like that in America. So using that big ideas and some of those life lessons can be a great one. I'll talk about life lessons in just a second. Again, there's that, I use it as America's growth mindset. So third way to make it relevant, this is not rocket science right here. I'm sure you all do this, but if you don't, it's the easiest thing to do. Relate it to the present. Relate your course to the present, your curriculum, even your skill, the skills that you might be developing, your assessment. I try to get kids to, realize about the news all the time. The cool thing about being a social studies teacher is we are handed our curriculum every day. It's like, and every 4 years, it's like, thank you, election cycle. But we're handed our curriculum every day. So if we're teaching, if I'm teaching about Martin Luther King Jr., and people will say, yeah, he gave a good speech, he was a civil rights leader. But then I can say, but why is it still a challenge, or why is there still a discrepancy about naming a street after Martin Luther King Jr.? Who would be opposed to naming a street or a holiday after Martin Luther King Jr.? Because it's in the news. It was in the news last year. Of course, talking about politics and impeachment, that's in the news. If you want to do geography, can you use the our COVID-19 through geography? Yes, depends on what level you're teaching. Right now, economics, it's in the news. So anytime you can tie the past and present together, or look at economics through current events, that's going to increase relevance. Little things like I did had students do sketch notes on the Gilded Age. Okay. Instead of, me lecturing about the Gilded Age, we did activities, and then they had the major ideas or major concepts of the Gilded Age. But if you look at my targets up here, okay, the second target is I can clearly and accurately connect present events and issues to those in the past. For every one of these aspects of the Gilded Age, they had to connect it to the present. And they realized that, oh yeah, maybe we are living in a second Gilded Age. Okay. I also have them. They had an end project where they had to actually they had to find current event articles about the Gilded Age, or current event articles that linked to Gilded Age topics, which would be anything from labor movement to inequity of wealth to mergers and acquisitions, and they can compare the past and the present. And what they were starting to realize is, oh, I guess this stuff does matter. That's why, can't, why couldn't Coke buy Pepsi? Because of the Gilded Age. Why is there such a problem? Why do we have an income tax? Because of the Gilded Age. So it's just another way to make that content relevant. Of course, you have to do it at the level, I'm not sure how many, kindergartners are going to understand the Gilded Age, but you can use, and you have to monitor the news as well. But it's another great way to make that link. So did somebody have a question, or did I hear a voice? Or?
Chuck, there was a question about, do you have a favorite site for current events?
Yes, and I forgot to have that link. So what my favorite site used to be CNN, because it was the easiest to type in. Okay. And I use CNN a lot, but, and I post up CNN, but I've now posted up CNN more to talk about recognizing bias in the media. So, because it is, Fox News, well, actually it should be Fox News on my side, I'm this way, and CNN, because they, whoop. That's very interesting. So there is I believe it's called All Sides, that it actually shows a current event, and it's, and I'll have to get the correct URL, but it shows it has a current event, and then it shows, like here is a more conservative report on it. Here's a more liberal report on it. And here's one in the middle. So I'm pretty sure it's allsides.com that I've used, but I just have All Sides in my mind. I have a little bookmark on it. And then also I use the local news, because I try to, as you'll see in our next one, I try to get everything local. Okay. This suggestion here, I think, actually has so much power and so much potential for anyone, especially in lower grade levels, because parents can help their students get local. I don't think our younger students have as much of a global view, even though that'll be a next one too. But they might know what's at the grocery store or how to get to the grocery store. So if you can get local, you can find some more relevance. I live in Wisconsin, and I firmly believe that I can teach American history starting around before the Civil War. I can teach everything through Wisconsin. All right. I can teach the abolition movement with the rescue of Joshua Glover, which is downtown by a burger joint that a lot of people like. I can teach World War I through Billy Mitchell here in the middle. I could teach the suffrage movement through Carrie Chapman Catt. I can teach the New Deal through New Deal programs and establishments or works projects that are still around today. I can teach the Cold War because Joseph McCarthy was here in Wisconsin. I can also teach the Cold War because about a quarter mile from our school was a Cold War missile site. And kids drive by it every day when they come to school. And I say, yeah, there were missiles there? Then I show pictures of them. Okay. Also, when I talk about military service and I talk about World War I introduced World War I by introducing Howard Gormley, the only student from our school that passed away in World War I in Europe. And I also talk about how he passed away from the flu, not from battle, which gives us a whole new look. And we can always link back to Howard Gormley. When I talk about Vietnam, one student from our school is on the wall, and I take students to Washington, D.C., and I show them his name. But his is the first picture I introduce when I start with our investigation of Vietnam, because it makes it relevant, it makes it local. So it can not only just be local to your local town or area, it can be to your school. And you can take your class on the road. This was my virtual learning class a couple weeks ago, where I taught my Zoom. We use Google Meet, but I taught my Google Meet class from a local park because that was created by the CCC. And that was a New Deal program. And a lot of kids had seen that, but they had no idea that that had anything to do with the New Deal. And after that, they're realizing like, wow, the New Deal is relevant. And so I challenged them in this time of social distancing, have your family take you to another park, give them a list of New Deal sites, and take a little selfie of it and post it. So again, using local, I believe, really can increase that relevance. And they can see the big picture actually goes to the little picture, if that makes sense. And I'll say that again, the big picture actually has something to do with their little picture, their life, their community, where they live. So there's got to be those places in Maine. I know that for a fact. So if you can think right now of anything that you can use possibly locally, or just kind of do a quick search. If you're doing, geography and you want to do the cardinal directions, north, south, east, west, you can have kids do a local, like fourth graders, do a map of their community and draw out the north, south, east, and west. If you want to talk about supply and demand, bring somebody in from anything about a supply chain locally, and you've got tons of resources with your parents. Talking about civics, that you're going to have local politicians that want to come into your classroom and talk. So even now, maybe even Zoom. So maybe try to get them to go on both sides of the spectrum and see what you can find. Once Joe would appreciate this. We have in Wisconsin, we have our senators are Tammy Baldwin, who's a very, very liberal Democrat, and Ron Johnson, who's a very, very conservative Republican. Joe, you know those guys, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, so I was fortunate enough to have them speak to my 8th graders at the same time in Washington, D.C. And they stood there, and it was interesting because Tammy Baldwin did stand on the left and Ron Johnson did stand on the right. And I just said to students real quick, that's the political spectrum. So they realized that locally that Wisconsin is a big purple state. So again, it brings in that relevance. Conversely, you can also get global to try to increase some relevance, especially in your global, in your like your world geography or world history class. But going global can, instead of having the big picture come down to the narrow, then maybe their narrow study, they can look at the big picture. So are there ways that you can have your curriculum go global? Whether it is using Twitter. Here we have, I have our 5th grade social studies teacher, Will Piper, has just used Twitter and our families at our school. He will take any possible connection to any other place in the world to try to get his students to learn that the world is a big place, but also it's smaller. It can be flat. And he actually teaches a class with this guy right here, Ekal Simpson, who's over in Ghana. And his students will sometimes communicate with our students, and they'll talk about a water walk, a water simulation about how precious fresh water is. And our students will go and carry around water at the same time talking with students in Ghana about the lack of fresh water. Or Ghana Independence Day, they celebrate Ghanaian Independence Day in Milwaukee and in Ghana. And they can realize that, wow, this world is a little bit more connected. It's more possible to do that. We have a big international fest every 2 or 3 years because they're the big thing. But we use all of our parents. And I'm not, I don't. It depends, of course, on the clientele of your school. But it's amazing the connections that our parents have. And if you ask a parent to come in and talk about their international culture, it's like they'll cook food, they'll pay for it, they'll bring everything in, right? They'll go bend over backwards. It's so powerful because now you're actually tying the local and the global and giving kids this view of, well, I guess I understand why we're learning about different cultures, because there are different cultures all around us. And then also you can have your students connect with other schools. This is called Pen Pal Schools. I believe it's free. And there's some other organizations out there where you can have your students write to students from other schools. You got to vet them, of course, ahead of time. But also you can try to use connections. If you're not on Twitter, I suggest you get on Twitter and you can just send out a tweet saying, is there another, is there you know, if you're teaching Latin American history or Latin American cultures, you can get out there and say, and find a good hashtag. I don't know what it would be, but I'd love to help you find it. Say, is there somebody out there that I can communicate with to, and have my students communicate with to flatten the world a little bit and develop some sort of like pen pal relationship or Twitter relationship, or another great one, I forgot to put it on here, Flipgrid. Has anybody used Flipgrid? You know, Flipgrid is an asynchronous, it can be asynchronous communication where I put out a message at, you know, 8 o'clock my time, and then 8 o'clock Japan's time, students from Japan can comment on that. And like, I can say, here's what we do, and our 5th grade does this. Here's what we do you know, here's my favorite game to play and why I like it, my favorite sporting event or whatever. And then 5th graders from Japan are going to comment for the kids and leave their own messages. Now, they can speak English. That's the good part. But, you know, by the way, if you want to tie it into a Latin American country, maybe you could talk to your your world language teachers, or if it's French or whatever world language you have in your school. But again, that's kind of the idea of local can make things relevant, but so can global. All right. One last one, Kiva is a real cool way of making things relevant globally as well. This is our 7th grade does this in their economics class. And Kiva, if you're not familiar with Kiva, it is an international organization that makes microloans to independent small proprietors all across the world. Just microloans. Sometimes these microloans are like $30 or $40. And our students, every year, as part of their 7th grade service learning project, they will raise money. They've done like cardboard arcades. They have sold stickers that they've created themselves, and they research these microloans, and they give out microloans to these small proprietors all over. And as you can see, we're talking from the Middle East to Fiji to Africa to Latin America. And they've given out, since 2015, in the last 5 years, 103 microloans. And sometimes those microloans get paid back, but they're not expecting to get them paid back. What they do then is they follow these microloans, that follow these people's businesses, and then they can understand a little bit more about the differences of economics in other countries, and how, you know, $25 to us isn't going to start a business, but $25 to Valentine for Kenya might be enough to get one goat or something like that, and can start a business. And how businesses are totally different. Again, it's going global, making the world, you know, we can make our content go from here to here, but we can also make our content go from here to here. That's my TikTok for the day. Okay. All right. Hope I'm not going too fast, but I have to go to class in a couple minutes, so I'm going to try to go through a few more, and I hope you're getting a pearl here. Another one, Dave Burgess, who is the author of Teach Like a Pirate. Hopefully you all have heard of Dave Burgess and you've read Teach Like a Pirate. When I taught methods, that was my one methods textbook. He has this idea of life-changing lessons, and I've got that in my classroom as well. Is what big lessons can we learn? Can we learn a lesson that's more personalized for us as students, and that can make it relevant as well. A perfect example of that, where I think that you can do that. Oops, I want to go past that. Is the civil rights movement. When I look at the civil rights movement, which is what I'm teaching. Sorry about that. What I'm teaching coming up virtually. And if you teach the civil rights movement, typically when we teach the civil rights movement, we do a timeline. You know, we start with you know, Plessy, and then we do Jim Crow, and then we do Brown versus the Board, and then we do the timeline, and we end with I Have a Dream. And it's a whole bunch of events, and kids kind of get the whole bunch of events, and they meet these really important people like Rosa Parks and Malcolm X, and sometimes we can do Cesar Chavez and others, and then they kind of go, okay, I got it, that's cool, I know what happened. But what if they could get a life lesson from that? What if they can take what happened in the civil rights movement and apply it to their own lives? The life lesson, my example I always give is that ordinary people can do extraordinary things. It just takes a little bit extra. And then so I have an assignment where kids actually they have to develop a lesson or come up with a lesson that they learned from the civil rights movement. And they have to explain how it applies to their life and how they could use that lesson to do something better in their life, and also how society can use that lesson to improve something. And a lot of kids end up talking about how, well, this is I can stand up for what's right. Well, what's not right? Well, maybe when we come to something about bullying, that there's strength in numbers, that if I want to get something done, I need to kind of make sure that I have a lot of people working with me together. They talk about nonviolence. They understand the power of words, and how, if they want to get their message across, they need to make sure that their message is well crafted, and that becomes personalized to them, which brings in the relevance. When we talk about the "I have a dream" speech, it's almost kind of like, what lessons can we learn from here about you? And if they personalize it and they internalize it, again, it brings in the relevance, brings in the engagement, and it makes them understand the content even more. Another huge way I think you can get relevant. I don't know how many of you are fortunate to teach in an interdisciplinary situation, but it's to get interdisciplinary. This is Chuck's little personal feeling right here. I consider, if you think about blood types and you think about the universal donor, does anybody know their blood type? Does everybody know theirs? All right. Is anybody a universal donor? Nice. I got to make sure that I know where, if I've ever been in Maine and I'm driving around, I need to find you guys, right? How about, is anybody a universal recipient? Because I'm going to argue that social studies is both. All right. Get rid of the blood types, get put in our classes. All right. And where's the social studies? They go with all of them, right? PE doesn't necessarily go with all of them. World language doesn't necessarily go with all of them, but social studies sure does. Okay. And you know what I noticed on there? I forgot math. I'm gonna have to add math, or I might not be well liked by somebody that I teach with. But how can you get interdisciplinary? Increase that relevance, like, of all classes. It could be anywhere from having an American Studies class, which I was able to do. We're studying the 1920s. Let's do a Harlem Renaissance poetry slam. We're going to do this. We're doing the Civil Rights Movement. What are they reading in our English class? They're reading the March Trilogy. Yeah, they're reading a comic book, a National Book Award winning comic book. We're talking about the Declaration of Independence and the ideals of the Declaration of Independence in history class or in civics class. Let's write an assignment about it. So if you can have an interdisciplinary class, that's one thing. Or if you can, you can do interdisciplinary. An obvious one is English and, ELA, reading and social studies, where you can have it combined like this, right? Or you could have them going side by side, and maybe they cross over a couple times here and there. All it takes is a little time and a little communication, and it brings that content even more, makes it more relevant to the students. Here's an even bigger one. This is an economics / literature / drama / art, streets of Victorian England, where kids developed skits. They researched the history and of Victorian England. All of them had an economics perspective in there. They read The Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. They developed their own skits and plays. They created the artwork for it, and then it was a walk through streets of Victorian England. It was nuts. Now, I'm not telling you that this is something that you're going to do for every topic, because this was like a huge project, but it was an entire 7th grade project that was pretty awesome. And obviously you can integrate technology seamlessly when it comes to increasing relevance. This is an interactive map of China, where students created, these are 5th graders that created some representations of things in China, and then it was on a huge butcher block piece of paper. It was pretty cool. And there it is at the outset there. Because sometimes I think that interdisciplinary work is that last puzzle piece. It's that piece that can bring everything together and lock them all together and increase that relevance. I think I got 2 last ones, and I apologize for running out of time, but as Joe can tell you, I like to talk. So another way I think you can increase relevance is through the power of choice. That can be a choice in how they present their work for when it comes to assessment. This is an example of a target display. You know, I've got learning targets, here they are, and I tell students that I want you to be able to hit those targets. Here's the content targets, that like historian targets, and these right here are my skill targets that you can communicate. I want you to hit those targets. Do it any way you want. You can, you know, do a podcast. You can do a presentation. You can write a graphic novel. Just, you know, I always tell them you can do it in interpretive dance. Do it any way you want. But the targets are the key, not the fact that you can take a test. And when students say, well, Mr. Taft, I'd rather just take a test, I go, okay, write one and give me the answer. Give me the answer key. I think that's even better than taking the test. And I do give tests here and there, but often I try to give choice. When it comes to World War I, I think if you give them an authentic assessment for the legacy or the authentic assessment that other people will see when it comes to World War I, instead of testing them about World War I want them to create an educational program that is going to educate, commemorate, and honor America's involvement in World War I. And I link it to the World War I Centennial Commission. And I say, I'm going to send these to the World War I Centennial Commission. And I do. I tweet them out to them and things like that. They realize that, oh, wow, I can choose about how I'm going to do this. And also I can, and I have some examples on those notes, but also it's relevant because there's a real organization that might look at this. When it comes to World War II, instead of giving them a test on World War II, I let them choose what they want to dig into in World War II. We talk about World War II big time, but I get them to dig into a compelling story. And this is where they develop the skills of asking questions and finding decent resources and communicating effectively. And they have to tell people why they should care about the story, and it personalizes it more. But it gives them that choice. It's not, I'm not saying like you have to investigate a battle. It's, I want you to investigate something that you want to investigate. That choice is pretty huge. And then the last one I would say, this is the one I am working on so hard over the last couple of years. This is, I think, the hardest one. This is the last part of the C3 framework. It's called taking action. It's taking what they're learning and doing something with it. And I don't just mean doing something with it like, okay, I'm going to take what I learned and I'm going to make a website. I'm going to take what I learned, I'm going to make a website, and then I'm going to use social media to get people to go to that website so they can learn more about how our fresh water is being ruined in the Milwaukee area, or about the garbage patch, or about bullying, or about income inequality. It is sort of that pie in the sky. Let's make our young historians, economists, political scientists, and our geographers, let's make them active citizens. This to me is like the gold standard of making it relevant because this brings it to them. We're doing it next week. On Friday, we're going to do our 9th annual March to the Memorials, where we have, this is our service learning project. This is my school. And we have students from, oh, sorry about that. We have students march, it's our service learning project. Get my sound off. We have our 8th grade leads it. They do public service announcements. They do fundraising drives. We have flyers put around. We have ads. We communicate with veterans organizations. And then as a community, we march 800 miles, which is the distance from Milwaukee, Wisconsin to Washington, D.C. And the idea is to bring up, one of our goals is to bring honor flights, bring veterans from Milwaukee all the way out to Washington, D.C. And it's part of our taking action to help them out. And we also raise money for veterans services as well locally. So it's combining that service learning, but it's action. I don't just mean action walking. It's trying to get more people to understand that we need to help out and raise money for veterans and to get our soldiers, our men and women in the military that has served to go to Washington, D.C. Kind of one of my fun things to do. But also it develops that bigger message of taking action. So this is where I would usually say, hey, is there anything else? What do you guys do? And I so apologize because I have 8:59 and I have to go to class tomorrow, or class in a minute. But does anybody have a quick comment at all? Or if I can see the chat, I keep on missing where the chat is here. And hopefully, did anybody get a pearl? which obviously is my goal here. Joe, are there any questions on the chat? Because I seem to have lost it. So.
No, I think you were going through, there's a lot of thank yous now
Okay.
at the end. People are asking if they can get a copy of the PowerPoint.
There should be a link to that to the presentation in that first set of that first doc. Should
Okay,
be up
and
at the
the Why
top.
Does It Matter Bitly one. Okay, presentation. Do you mind if I kind of pull that apart a little bit and build out some of the resources with?
Absolutely, please do, please do. This is you know, again, you know, I hope you got a pearl. I really do. I am so excited for you guys. And Joe, if you could put me on your listserv, because I don't think I am. I think I'm on the Twitter group, but I don't think I'm on the listserv. I would love to join in on as many of these as I can, just for my own personal growth. You know, hopefully you got a little bit of a blueprint for your class. Maybe if you have time over the next, you know, little while, you kind of fill this in. Maybe even, you know, I'm glad that I was able to do this at the very, very start, because as you go through many of these professional development opportunities, possibly think about one of these as well, about where you can increase that relevance. And I just want to thank you all. Thanks for what you're doing. Thanks for being safe. Thanks for fighting a good fight and for keeping social studies awesome. And Joe, thanks again for the opportunity and what you've done for me and for what you're doing for the Teachers of Maine. You're the best at it, my friend. So it's much appreciated.
Awesome. Well, Chuck, thank you for giving it over your time, and thank you for continuing to prove why I can say nice things about you all the time. That was amazing.
All right. Go Badgers, buddy.
Awesome. On Wisconsin.
All right. See you guys later. Take care.